So welcome again, everybody. That's the third welcome for this morning. My name's Ken, and I'm the pastor of this All Nations congregation. For any visitors who are wondering who I am, lots of different people involved in our service this morning, and that's very deliberate because we've, in particular, wanting to involve as many of the TAB Trust as possible. But I wanted to, just before I hand over to Glenn, who's going to guide us through the next part of our service, I wanted to just remind you of what prayer and self-denial, this 4 weeks that we're setting aside for prayer and self-denial for the mission of our church, what it's all about. Ian explained that we've just started this, that it's going to run for the next 4 weeks, and it's for the mission of this church, not only here locally, but also overseas in the various places where we have international workers. The theme is for such a time as this, and that's a verse straight out of the book of Esther. Where Esther was in a position where her uncle Mordecai says, you may well be here for such a time as this, a time of crisis for the Jewish people, a time where Esther was called upon to use her position to help save her people. And it's a challenge, really, that can be applied to us today, because we live in a whole lot of different situations in our workplaces, our families, our neighbourhoods, our places of study, our church, and the mission of this church around the world. And who knows, but God may well have placed you and me in this place for such a time as this. That's what we're going to be picking up on as we look, first of all, at the mission of our church through the TAB Trust and what they are doing, which we'll be looking at today. Next Sunday, as we look at the mission of this church in our local neighbourhood, and we have Jay Wynn Major as our special guest, who I'm going to be interviewing next Sunday. And then we'll be moving on to feature our international workers in the different countries that they are located in. So here's how you can be involved in our 4 weeks of prayer and self-denial. The first is that you come to church. Please come to church. Please come all of the 5 Sundays that span the 4 weeks of this time, because each Sunday is going to feature on someone different, something different. And it's good for us to have a big, broad perspective of all that God is doing through this church here in New Zealand and around the world. So come every Sunday for the 5 Sundays of prayer and self-denial. Then I'm going to challenge you, I'm going to invite you to read the book of Esther. On your way in this morning, you will have been given an Encounter with God devotional. You'll see that it's an out-of-date one. That's because this is one that features the book of Esther. This is the devotional I use, and it's got a very good devotional through Esther, which I want to encourage you to use over this coming 4 weeks, to read through the book of Esther. Use the daily devotional. You've actually got 4 weeks to do what's a 2-week study, so you've got plenty of time to do it. And use this bookmark that you were given on the way in too. It's got a tear-off bookmark. So take it. Oops, I've ripped it. Doing it in too much of a hurry here. Rip it more neatly than what I'm doing. Put that in your Bible, in the book of Esther. Find where the book of Esther is, stick it in there. Then you can put this part in your daily devotional where they start, which is partway through. I think on page 34 or something like that. And read your way through the book of Esther, because there's lots of good stuff in there to apply to our lives and our situation today. Pray every day if you can, but in particular I'm going to invite you to come to prayer online, stay at home, online through Zoom, 7:30 every Tuesday through the coming 4 weeks. We're going to gather for prayer online to pray for the mission of our church relating to the Sunday that's just been. So we're going to pray for the local mission in New Zealand this coming Tuesday, which we're going to be hearing more about shortly. And then finally, as Ian's already challenged us to, this is an opportunity for us to give up something. Might be just giving up coffee for the 4 weeks. It might be something more than that. Giving up something sacrificially and setting aside the equivalent amount of money to save that up over the 4 weeks for our collection at the end of the 4-week period of prayer and self-denial, which all of that, with that money is going to go for our overseas mission workers to support them and all that they do. So that's the challenge, those 4 things. Come to church, read the book of Esther, pray, particularly on Tuesday nights for our Zoom prayer meeting, and then give up something and save that for our offering for prayer and self-denial. So may the Lord bless you all, and may the Lord bless the TAB Trust as they carry on in this part of the service. Handing over to Anna now to read a Bible reading from Esther, where this theme for such a time as this is taken from.
Good morning. Reading from Esther 4, verses 12. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jew will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this? Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. Here ends our Bible reading.
Everybody, my name's Glenn. I'm the Executive Chairman of the TAB Trust, and you've been advised while we're up here, I'm about to launch into a sermon, which you'll be really excited about. Fortunately for you, I'm not going to preach a sermon, and nor have any of my colleagues who are the board members. I don't think preaching sermons are our primary calling for any of us on the board, but we've all been called with other gifts and skills that God's given us, and we're using some of those in our role at the TAB Trust. So this morning we're just going to share 5 examples of missional things that the TAB Trust is either directly involved in or has been supporting by way of grants, missional activities, some here in Auckland and around New Zealand. So what is the TAB Trust's missional purpose? It's really very simple. It's an investment business, owns a whole lot of investments. It manages those investments to make money, and then the surplus of that money, part of that is used to give grants to Baptist missional activities throughout New Zealand. It's a simple idea. It was founded by some people in this church just over 100 years ago, in fact nearly 120 years ago. So this is a very long, for New Zealand, which is a very young country since European colonisation, it's a very long-standing charitable enterprise. So we've got a number of investments. I'm not going to talk about those this morning, but there is some information about the TAB Trust in your newsletter, which you've been emailed out, or some of you might have picked up hard copies this morning. There's a page there that looks a bit like that. It's got a bit of a summary of the different commercial properties and horticultural investments and farms and shares and so on, Christian savings investment. Some of you might have parked here this morning in the building next door, so that commercial car park's one of the investments of the TAB Trust. And look, the TAB Trust doesn't solicit you for funds, it doesn't go around asking for donations, it entirely makes its own money through managing its investments. So it really is a business enterprise that's doing good for God's kingdom. So how does it all work? Well, look, in its simplest form, that's the model there on the diagram. Tries to operate all these investments profitably. Obviously, it's got costs and staff and all the rest of it to pay. That's its annual surplus at the end, or its profit, if you like. And it does 2 things with that. It reinvests part of that profit every year, because you don't give away all your profit if you're a charitable enterprise. That's a really dumb thing to do, because it means that the future generations of beneficiaries down the line, you've got this thing called inflation that goes on, right? And so it eats away the earning power of your investments. So you've got to reinvest some of your profit every year into your capital so that it's bigger, therefore it's earning slightly more, and that looks after future generations of beneficiaries. Because, you know, the demands of today's beneficiaries are always greater, right? We always have more ideas, more amazing things we can do for God, and they need more support. Well, if we gave all the profits away every year to the things of today, we're prejudicing against the beneficiaries of tomorrow. So that's why some of it's reinvested, and then the balance is given away to beneficiaries. And we're going to talk about 5 of those as examples of our beneficiaries this morning. So I'm going to invite the first one to come up now. It's the TAB Student Apartments. Come on up, team. Now, I've just told you that this operation's an investment operation that makes money. Now I'm going to depart from the one thing that we don't invest in with an idea of profit. There's one thing that the TAB Trust does, which we're quite happy as long as it covers its costs, and that's a small tertiary student apartment complex that we own and operate on the top floor next door. I'm going to introduce Marcus and Beth Stewart to you. These are our pastoral care and managers of our tertiary apartments. There's 1 or 2 students who live there in the congregation this morning. So welcome, folks. Tell us all about what you're doing up there.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. Okay, so the student apartments. We're good. What is up there? Where is it? As Glenn just said, it's across the plaza on the top floor of the building next door here. We have our student apartments, previously known as the TAB Hostel, where we have 13 apartments. Our apartments can take anywhere from 2 students up to 5. This year we have 20 students across the 7 apartments that are given to student accommodation. The other 6 apartments have people that might be a little bit familiar to some of you. You can work your way through those names. What are we doing? What is the student apartments about? The students that we live alongside are in a significant stage of their lives. For most of them, they have just left home for the first time. This comes with thoughts and emotions that range from eagerly anticipating their independence to anxious thoughts about leaving home and family for the first time. And this is all before they even arrive at our door. These emotions and everything in between play out in the flow of the first semester as students settle into a very different environment, including tertiary study, forming new friendships, and becoming familiar with the city around them. We offer a safe environment, a friendly environment, where we encourage a sense of community and support. Our orientation camp at the beginning of the academic year is an important couple of days when we make new connections with those that we will share the year with. We hear the gratitude of parents who really appreciate this stepping stone for their teenagers, from family-centered life to independence. There is a lot of life, laughter, and fun that happens in the apartments. Additionally, beyond the first weeks and the stresses of entering in, there are some stresses that don't disappear. Those early tensions are replaced with others, including study-related anxiety, homesickness, loneliness, and we have encountered these even in this first semester this year. As with any of us, a smiling face can conceal more challenging circumstances that our students are dealing with. There is an additional transition for many of our students, those who come from Christian families. It can be a defining period in their faith journey. They leave a family setting that has perhaps included a strong faith element, maybe regular church attendance and involvement, and these things guided by their parents. But now, it's up to them. What do they choose? We clearly describe the student apartments as a place where Christian values are promoted, and part of that includes encouraging our students to find a local church where they feel like they can fit in. During our camp and at our weekly communal meal, we intentionally bring God into the picture of our lives, and we want the student apartments to be a place where our students are encouraged to keep engaging with their faith. And it's not just down to Beth and myself or some of our non-student residents up there. We have been blessed in the 18 months that we have been managing the apartments to have a core group of students with strong, confident, genuine faith. And we pray that this crucial piece continues to be evident and influential as we move forward. And then just to finish up with some prayer requests that you could be adding to the things that you pray about. Please be praying for our student apartments and our students, that the student apartments would be a place of peace. For our Christian students, that they would find significant encouragement in their journeys with God. For our non-Christian students, that they would get a taste of something different that makes them ask more questions. For us, myself, Beth, as we live alongside our students, for wisdom and for grace, for our family as well, our girls. And please also be praying for our new students for 2022, that they would contribute to a rich environment in the student apartments. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcus and Beth. Look, some of the issues that Marcus has just described were the same issues that many of us faced when we were tertiary students and we'd just left home or we'd just become Christians or whatever, right? So those are the same things. But I think we have to realise that what Marcus and Beth are dealing with, some of the things they deal with are specific to our times right now. We've got rapidly changing social attitudes. We've got new norms developing and what life in New Zealand is like and opinions about what it should be like. And if you're a late-stage teenager starting out on a new part of life, that brings a whole lot of extra turmoil to those angst-ridden teenage years. And these folks here are trying to bring stability, help those students to maintain and grow a Christian faith in the face of, what's a fairly dynamic and changing social environment in the country. So we'll pray and encourage everyone to pray for Marcus and Beth in particular as they do that. Now we're just going to switch a little bit to something else now. Many of the missional activities which the TAB Trust has funded over its 120-year history have been bricks and mortar, okay? That's kind of our specialty. We give grants to Christian churches and Christian ministries that need assistance with buying property, developing property, modernising property for the purposes that God's got here in this land. And our next example is from Titirangi Baptist Church. Now, Andy Shoodall, the senior pastor there, is not able to be with us today, but he's kindly pre-recorded a message that we're just going to play for you now. And you'll see that this is a really interesting story of a church that got stuck with a building project for a very long time, 15 years in fact. And you'll hear a little bit of the TAB Trust's role in helping them to get unstuck and to make progress. So let's hear from Andy Shoodall, Senior Pastor at Titirangi.
Kia ora. My name is Andy Shoodall. I'm the Senior Pastor of Titirangi Baptist Church, here on the west southern edge of Auckland. In 1952, a group of men and women, Christians from elsewhere in Auckland, established a Sunday school outreach here on site. 2 years later, a church was established, the Atkinson Valley Church of Christ, Life and Advent, that would soon become known as Kauriland's Church of Christ, Life and Advent. Over the decades ahead, the church would grow and grow, primarily through this commitment to children and families and then youth. So much so that in the late 1990s, as the church moved into the Baptist Union, became Titirangi Baptist Church, it moved out of its buildings on this site because the buildings could no longer hold the gathered church. And so moved to a local school just over the roads at Glen Eden Intermediate and then down the roads to Kauriland's primary school just a few years later. That initial move out of the buildings was just to be for a couple of years, or so it was thought. But it led to a 24-year, a whole generation being out of the building on Sunday mornings. The church continued to use these buildings to reach the community. And out of that outreach, out of its start and out of the work of the church, came this vision to be a community centre at the heart of our community, with a heart for our community, to be a place of good news, demonstrating the good news of Jesus for all, to provide community for people. And so this vision grew and grew. When I arrived in 2015, that vision was on the precipice of being built. Plans had been drawn up and given approval to start building. The hurdle was that it was more expensive than the church could afford. And so we came to the Lord again and again through that time to seek his guide and lead for us. We really valued through that time the partnership of the Baptist Tabernacle and Christian Savings, helping us to see what might be achievable and to look at what we could do. We looked at a number of different things, and then it became apparent through prayer and through discernment that what we could do was to renovate these buildings that were here already, establishing 3 buildings on site, a church offices and centre for admin next door. This building, the Kouriland Centre, where we have this auditorium and a hall and a number of breakout rooms. And then Konini Community House, built from one of the houses that were already on site, establishing a place for smaller gatherings and community gatherings with a couple of outlying rooms and new car park. And it's been a tremendous thing within the community. We've really valued the partnership of the Baptist Tabernacle Trust and Christian Savings in making it achievable, adding to the $2 million that the church have given and pledged, and then on beyond to provide finances again, alongside Foundation North, through God's provision, through the generous $110,000 from the Baptist Tabernacle and the mortgage given by Christian Savings, we've been able to achieve this. And that really is delivering right now a lot of what we've seen and was envisioned for this site. It's full Monday through to Saturday with people coming, bringing family gatherings and business gatherings, community groups and hobby groups, counselling and exercise classes, a cafe that we run and a seniors group that we run, and mainly music that we run, alongside Alpha, which has already seen someone come to faith, and someone else right on the brink of faith right now will be baptizing one of those new converts in just a few weeks. It's been such an exciting time for us as the congregation has grown, as our profile in the community has grown, and this centre will become a centre of ministry and of outreach and of community in the next 10, 20, 50, 100 years. We are so grateful. So thank you so much for the partnership with the Baptist Tabernacle Trust and our partnership with Christian Savings. We're seeing gospel witness in this place amplified and made clearer and better by this new resource. Thank you so much. We really value your partnership and your prayers as we continue into this next phase of life and ministry for us as a church. God bless.
So what was Ken's little introduction? The book of Esther, for such a time as this. We've got students on our doorstep next door. They need safe, secure, cared for Christian environment for such a time as this in their lives. We have churches like this seeking to do a great work in their community, in that example, Titirangi, but they got stuck. They needed some technical guidance, they needed help with funding. So the TAB Trust's mission was here for such a time as this for Titirangi. So that's what we're talking about today. Now you would have heard Andy there not just talking about the TAB Trust, but talked about another organisation called Christian Savings, which you may or may not have ever heard of. So I'm just going to switch now to our third example for the morning. Christian Savings is not an organisation that the TAB Trust has given grants to. Christian Savings is effectively like a banking operation. It takes deposits and then lends that money out to Christian churches and Christian organisations so they can do their work. Now, one of the things that they need to be able to do that is not just all of us depositing money in term deposits there, but they need what's called share capital. So any business, it's just a business like any other business, essentially needs to have a strong capital base of people and organisations who have invested in shares in the business. That's their capital. Now, Government regulations made it very difficult for these small banking-style operations to even exist in New Zealand, and a number of Christian organisations that had these sort of operations had to fold up. The Baptist movement decided to try and use their organisation to make it not just for Baptists, but non-denominational across all Christian churches in New Zealand, and build a big enough banking operation to survive and be viable. And the TAB Trust saw this as a critically important thing for the future of Christian work in New Zealand. Most of our commercial banks do not understand churches. They look, when you go there for a church goes to a bank for a loan, often the loan assessors look at those loan applications and say, oh, where's the revenue? Have you got a shop? Have you got commercial buildings? What's earning money? We can't count all these donations every Sunday. That's not revenue, that's just sort of donations. And then you have to explain to them, well, the people are the church, not the building, and the people in that community give money, and that's how it works. And, that kind of goes over the head of most of our banks. So we needed a strong Christian banking organisation that understood churches and Christian charities, firstly. Secondly, you're probably aware that all of the big banks in New Zealand are owned by Australia, so the policies chop and change. Sometimes charities are in favour, sometimes they're out of favour for lending. Nothing to do with what happens in New Zealand. It's driven from the boardrooms in Australia. And of course the other thing is that the massive profits they all make out of New Zealand all go back largely to Australian shareholders. Now the TAB Trust's got a particular view on this, which you can agree or disagree with. We wanted to establish a Christian banking operation firstly, and in a tiny little way that we're able to, we'd like to do it to the big Australian corporate banks who don't understand things and all the profits go overseas. So we have invested nearly $3 million of our capital. I'm not talking about a deposit and term deposits, I'm talking about share capital, so it's at risk, earns a relatively low dividend, so it's not a great investment in terms of making money, but we see it as a great investment for the reasons that I've described. Now, we're lucky today, fortunate today, wrong word, my wife will tell me off for using that, you're never allowed to use the word lucky. Dan Mazengarb, the lending manager at Christian Savings, is going to come up and just tell you a little about the work and the mission of Christian Savings. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Glenn. Well, good morning, church. It's lovely to be here with you this morning. So you might ask, what's a boring banker doing here talking about mission? I am pretty boring, but behind the front line of mission is a lot of boring things that have to happen and come together to make that frontline mission work. And one of those boring things is finance. So it's my privilege to be working in an organisation that is not for profit, it's for the mission of the church in the area of finance. So who are we? Well, we're named Christian Savings and we're here to finance churches and other Christian charities. Now, Glenn's touched on this, but if we rewind to the 1960s and 70s, when Glenn had a lot longer hair, and I wasn't even born, the Baptist churches were going through a big revival and growth and expansion. And they had this problem in that when they wanted to plant a church, as Glenn has alluded to, they'd rock up to a bank and the bank would decline them because apparently banks don't believe in 2,000 years of church history, and they don't believe that churches can sustain what they do. So we, the Baptists, set up the Baptist Savings and Development Society, which was there to lend to Baptist churches. Now, if we fast forward all the way to the post-GFC world, the New Zealand government rolled out a bunch of new regulations which made it very hard for organisations like ourselves to do what we do. But we also saw an opportunity there because we were at that stage a full Baptist entity, and we said, how about we do this thing called working together as Christians, which is maybe a unique thing in some sectors. So what we did is we worked with the Presbyterians, we worked with the Wesleyan Methodists, we worked with Elam, and we said, how about we all join our resources together and build something that's just bigger than just ourselves. So that's when we changed from Baptist Savings to Christian Savings. And as far as we know, we're the world's only not-for-profit interdenominational finance company. And we're really, really proud of that because it is a testament to the outside world of Christians working together for something bigger than themselves. So we finance Christian churches and charities. So some of those charities are things like community housing providers, Christian daycare centres, Christian schools, and things like that. So how do we work? Finance is really simple. Imagine us just like your corner store dairy. They buy milk for cheap and sell it on at twice the price. We don't do that, but it's the same concept in that we issue term deposits. That's how we buy our money, and so we pay those depositors a return, and then we use that money and we lend that out to churches. So for the likes of people like you who might have savings at a bank, you can put those funds with us. We will pay you a return. But you'll also know that that money is being used not to lace the pockets of big Australian banks, but to go out to other churches who are doing great missional work around New Zealand. So that's how we work. So we've got about just over 200 million of term deposits, and we have a loan book of about 185 million in loans throughout the country. So what does this have to do with the TAB Trust? Well, in 2017, we went through a bit of a complicated restructure where we transitioned from an incorporated society into a company, and I won't bore you with the legal details of that. But what that did is it gave us the ability to scale, and that was all part of the plan of becoming interdenominational and big enough that we could pay for all the compliance that we have to keep up with. Some of you will be aware of the ever-increasing compliance in this world, and that requires a lot of money. So to be able to keep up with that, we had to grow. And as part of that process as a company, we reached out to a number of investors like the TAB Trust to say, hey, how about you put some share capital into our business so that we can accelerate what we're doing and we can reach further and deeper into the kingdom with what we do. So the TAB Trust initially invested, I think it was 2.1, and then reinvested their dividends from there. And that was a really key movement and moment for us. The TAB Trust was really foundational in building that momentum behind that capital raise. But not only that, is that with that investment, we got a new director, which is Glenn. So Glenn sits on our board and brings a wealth of property and finance experience, which has really helped Christian Savings grow. So really grateful for Glenn's involvement there as he's brought his expertise to the board. So it's not just the money, but also that know-how that has come with that investment that we're really grateful for. So thank you for all those who were aware of that and may have voted on that. Because it's really helped transform the work that we do. So here's a few examples. So that's just I won't go into that. That might be a little bit complicated, but just to give you an idea around that acceleration of investment, for every dollar of capital, we can do $8 of commercial lending, right? So when the TAB Trust invested $2 million, it meant that we could automatically start lending up to $16 million of loans. So really helped us to increase what we do. So a few of our projects has been Long Bay Baptist on the North Shore. They have built a new daycare centre, so it's a faith-based daycare centre, and some of those, they don't run it for profit, but there is a nice little surplus there that gets reinvested into the church so that the church can expand its mission. Small Fries, it's another daycare centre on the North Shore. And then this is a really exciting project down in Christchurch, Oxford Terrace Baptist, one of the oldest Baptist churches in New Zealand, lost its church in the earthquakes, and we were able to help them raise finance to rebuild their building. Now they're going on to stage 2, which is a series of apartments and commercial office space. And this is a really unique project because what they're trying to build is a modern day monastery. So they want people living on site, they want a church doing its mission on site. They've got businesses, they've got a cafe, and their building is used Monday to Sunday at full capacity. It's really, really amazing what they are doing in Christchurch. So we're hopefully going to be part of seeing them build the next stage of that development. We work with the likes of Habitat for Humanity. It's a community housing provider providing homes for the poor and vulnerable around New Zealand, and this was a project where they brought a new home for their second-hand store, which generates revenue through those charitable organisations of getting donated goods and then selling them on to those who can't afford things at full price. So they do really great work in Nelson in the housing space. And then this one, I just wanted to put this one in because it's a little bit out of the bag, but we see a lot of poor behaviour out there in the finance sector, a lot of loan sharks, and a lot of people who, unfortunately, in the church realm, don't have the finance and management expertise, and they get themselves into all sorts of trouble. So there was a church in South Auckland who had received some really poor legal advice and didn't have great accounts, and they found themselves in a position where they were unconditional on the purchase of a building, and they had to get finance from somewhere and no bank would finance them. So they got what we call second or third tier lenders to finance them into it. So they had two loans, one at 8% and one at 15% interest, which was just an eye-watering amount of money going out the door on this interest, and they were only 1 year loans, so every year they have to reapply and pay an establishment fee. So these guys were really on their knees, and we were able to come along, we were able to help them get proper accounts set up and help them tidy up their operation and refinance them from 8 and 15% down to 4%. And get them repaying that loan as fast as possible. So we're not just there for the big flash churches, we're there for the small ones as well, because we want to be there for all of the kingdom. And then that's just some financial summaries of how things have gone since 2017, again since the TAB has invested and other investors were brought on board. We see year-on-year growth each year as churches around the country are wanting to do new and exciting things. So always in a phase of growth and facing high demand. So just want to say thanks to the TAB Trust for investing in what we do, because through us we're able to really expand the network of churches and Christian charities in New Zealand.
Thank you. The story of Christian Savings is a roaring success, and we are grateful to God for that success, because we've got nearly $3 million worth of our money invested in it, but it's going really well, and you can hear from the enthusiasm of Dan. Dan's a boring lawyer by training and qualification and background, switched to banking. He's absolutely dedicated. There's a very, very strong management team at Christian Savings. They know what they're doing. Yes, they get paid a good salary, but they're in it because they want to make a difference. They know that it's part of God's calling on their life. For such a time as this, Christian Savings exists so that we as a Christian community have got a lender who understands what Christian mission's all about. So we're going to move to the next one. So we're on to number 4 example now, and that's Carey Baptist College. Now, I told you earlier that most of the things that the TAB Trust supports with grants are bricks and mortar. They're for buying land and buildings and so on, and we heard from Titirangi as one of those examples, and the vast majority of them are like that. We resist like crazy giving grants for operating costs for Christian organisations. That's a great way to burn up your the value, the impact long term of your grant. Now, we get lots of applications from very good Christian missional and ministry organisations wanting grants for their operating costs. You know, they have a new venture they want to get going, or something they want supported. It's not that those things aren't great missions in themselves. It's just that if we fund them, there's a risk of the dependency thing. What happens next year if we don't fund that, you know? does it die because we weren't able to keep funding it forever? The other thing is, you burn up a lot of cash, whereas we're in the business of the 100-year horizon, so we want our cash grants to go into things that are going to last and provide the foundations for ministry going on and on. Now, one exception to the rule, there's always an exception to the rule, and I'm going to put that up now as the example. So Carey College is up next. The principal, John Tucker, is in Invercargill preaching today down there, so he's not able to join us. He's also pre-recorded a message. So let's hear from John Tucker of Carey Baptist College.
Kia ora. I'm John Tucker, Principal of Carey Baptist College. Carey is the theological college of the Baptist churches of New Zealand. We train leaders for ministry and mission. Since 1926, when Carey was first based at the Baptist Tab, we've seen thousands of Carey graduates use their training to bring gospel renewal in churches and communities across Aotearoa and around the world. 3 years ago, we established a new groundbreaking leadership training pathway called Ngā Pou Amorangi. It's designed to plant churches and bring gospel renewal among Māori. I'll let some of our staff and students outline the program and why it's so strategic, but can I personally thank you for your generous support. Ngā Pou students are already beginning to plant churches, transform communities and lead gospel renewal among Māori. And this is possible because of the TAB Trust's funding. So, kei te mihi, thank you.
Kia ora mai tātou, ko rewa te kahu toko ingoa, no Ngāti Kahunguru te iwi, Ngāti Pauere te hapu, te kahu o te rangi te tupuna whare. I am the kaiwhakahaere, or the director of Ngā Pou Amorangi, and I'm the one that designed the course about 4 years ago. The heart drive for Ngā Pou Amorangi is to give a context where students, predominantly Māori, are able to explore leadership development through a framework of the marae pōwhiri process. Overall, the main purpose for Ngā Pou Amorangi is to give students an opportunity in a Māori context to be able to explore their faith, their leadership skills, both their personal leadership, how they lead teams, how they integrate teams, how they lead organisations or systems through a Māori framework and a Māori lens, whilst still growing in their faith and the expression of faith in the community that they might be involved with. So we have tauira or students that are in church work at the moment, they're assistant pastors. We have others that are working for Māori trusts around New Zealand, community organisations, marae-based organisations. We've got one who's a staff member at Carey, and a variety of other roles that our students are participating in. Hoi anō, anei te kōrero māku. Here's my little short kōrero about Ngā Pou Amorangi. Thank you very much. Kia ora.
Kia ora, ko Denise Hau, he uria hau mō Ngāti Porou, Ngāti Raukawa, Taranaki me Ngāpuhi. Hi, I'm Denise Timms. I joined Ngā Pou Amorangi at the beginning of last year in 2020, while I was also enrolling in some postgraduate papers. I believe in Māori leadership development, and I think it's essential for our churches and for Christian ministries. And I felt Ngā Pou Amorangi was in a safe, theological and kaupapa Māori environment. It provided a space to grapple with any issues that specifically related to being Māori and Christian. And it provided an opportunity to learn how to conduct oneself in a Māori environment by learning appropriate tikanga and protocols for different gatherings, and to gain confidence and practice in those situations. In my local community in Manurewa, where my husband and I live, we've been involved in house blessings and tangihana, where te reo Māori has been appropriate to be used and spoken, and such things as karakia. And so Ngā Pou Amorangi has given me more confidence to know what is appropriate for Māori families that are inviting us into these spaces and places. Nā reira, kei te mihi, kei te mihi, kei te mihi.
Kia ora koutou, ko Kiwi Taranaki tōku ingoa, ko Ngāti Pawa, Ngāti Tamaho, Ngāti Mahanga tōku hapu, ko te waka o Tainui. Ngā Pou Amorangi has been a source of strength for me to to stand on the marae and to speak to our people about the gospel. Being part of Napa Amarangi and being here every Tuesday and being with our tauira and learning karakia, learning waiata, learning about the gospel in our space has been an awesome experience. I loved it here, learning about the gospel in a college that has really helped me bring the gospel to our church. And they've seen how well I've grown over the last 3 years that I've been here. I'd like to thank you for your gift and for your support.
I think we're all pretty concerned about what's happened to our Maori population in this country over the last 150 years, aren't we? If we look at the statistics, Maori are economically underprivileged. They're overrepresented in all of the bad stuff: health, prison population, academic achievement, labour force. It's not a happy story. This course is about training leaders to be both Maori and Christian. The reason the TAB Trust is diverting from its policy of primarily giving grants to bricks and mortar, and we're giving grants to operating costs, we're subsidising this Napa Amarangi course. The reason we're doing that is these are high calibre future leaders in Maoridom and in New Zealand. We're training them to be Maori and be Christian. They're already having an impact in all kinds of ways. It'll be exciting to tell you about it. We haven't got time. But this is an investment in the future. It may not be bricks and mortar. This is an investment in helping Maoridom to improve their lot, and we all have a responsibility to do that. Our last example out of the 5, we're back to a property example. It's Langholm Baptist Church, which is also out in West Auckland. I'm going to invite Simon Radford to come up. As he comes up, I want to make one point. How on earth does the TAB Trust choose which of the many, many applications for grants, how does it choose which ones to support? Because of course we can't support them all. We undertake a program called curated giving, which means we don't just get a letter from Simon Radford and say, oh yes, he needs a new upgrade his church building, we'll give him $100,000 and move on. That's not how it works. We've got limited funds. We get into a relationship with the likely beneficiaries and we work with them, give them some expertise if they need it. We've got a lot of experts on our board, and then, you know, once their project is kind of coming together at their end and we're happy with where it's at, then we give a grant. Why did we choose Langholm Baptist over all of the other ones? Quite simply 2 reasons. These folks were highly motivated and committed, but more importantly, this is a church that's connected to their community. They're a smallish church, but they have so many programs and such a lot of connection with the community at Langholm that they stood out as somebody we wanted to support. So the buildings that Simon's going to talk about, they weren't just building nice buildings for their parishioners, for their church-going folks. These buildings are used all the time with lots of non-believers in that community of Langholm, and that's why we chose this one above the others. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you, Glenn. Yeah, thank you. Well, let me say it's such a pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you for letting me speak for a few moments. And let me introduce you to our church family. So there we are. This is the church family out of Langholm. They'd send you your greetings and your appreciation, particularly to this faith community, to the TAB Trust and Christian Savings as well. We're like Titirangi, we're out in the fringe of the city in the Waitakere Ranges. We've been there since the 60s, birthed out of children's ministry like Titirangi Baptist. Our mission is to serve God in our community and see people come to faith in Christ. But we did have a limiting factor, and our limiting factor was our buildings. Our buildings had been built in the 60s and then another building drive in the 70s. And they were tight. That's right. That's right. So they were a bit tired, and they really weren't functioning because the needs had changed. Here's a photo. This is actually a very generous photo, actually, because it doesn't really show the state of deterioration of the old building. That building came from Green Lane West. Originally, it was moved out to Langholm in the 60s and bought by the church, and it was tired. So that's now been demolished. 10 years ago, we started this building program with a vision that was simply to have facilities that help and don't hinder our ability to serve God in our community. So here's what's been achieved with the support of the TAB Trust and Christian Savings. There's a new pavilion that's since been furnished. That was just prior to the opening, just on completion. It's a brand new facility to replace the old house that had been demolished. It's a beautiful new building that's now full of lots of different activities. And that's our community space. It's right on the road, the main road. It's close to foot traffic and so forth. And then here's the other photo. This is the addition of a whole new toilet block, shower, and a beautiful new commercial kitchen. We're having people now wanting to rent that from us, which is a good return on revenue to us. They are fabulous facilities. So our neighbours across the back fence of the church, they're Seventh-day Adventists, they're a lovely family. They said, wow, there's something happening every day of the week at church now. And I said, yeah, that's true. We have exercise classes. That's a whole bunch of community stuff like exercise classes, which we go to as well to build a relationship. She goes to it. My wife goes to it, yeah. We have a Friday Kids Club. So on a Friday every week, a bunch of kids form a walking school bus and they come down and they join our Friday Kids Club. We have youth stuff. We have community birthday parties. Last weekend we had an 80th birthday party from people in our community. We have youth events. We have a men's breakfast. We have all sorts of stuff happening. It's just so cool. And to be honest, as I walk around our church building, I think, gee, is this really our church? It just seems so flash. We're kind of pinching ourselves. It still feels amazing. So coming back to our relationship with the TAB Trust, Glenn mentioned a grant of $100,000, which was a massive shot in the arm for us. But I want to suggest that beyond the dollar value of that grant was just having that sense of partnership with the expertise that resided within the TAB Trust members. So one Saturday, about 2 years ago, they came on site and we sat together, and it was just great, just tapping into their knowledge and experience in a whole range of different fields, from building industry to finance to fundraising. And some of the gems of wisdom we derived that day were things like how to go about the tender process, just giving a heads up that the tender prices is likely to be more than the QS estimates, all sorts of stuff like that. Suggestions around further fundraising potential, and perhaps most useful was how we could use the new facilities to generate revenue that can then flow back into the life of the church and back out into the community. I think for me personally, just having a team of people like Glenn and his trustees, fellow trustees, behind us just to support us and believe in us was really important. So just a bit about the numbers. The building project was $1.2 million. We got the grant of $100,000 from the TAB Trust. The church family raised $500,000 for that project. We had some savings from a sale of an asset, and then Christian Savings have given us a mortgage of $240,000, which we're aiming to pay off in the next 3 years. So just to wrap up, here's some photos. You know, when you have a long project, it's really important to celebrate a win. So here's some photos of our opening. So that's the new canopy that's kind of creates a link between the existing auditorium and the new facility. This was open day in March. It was just happened to be exactly the same day Titirangi Baptist opened their building. So I think the trustees had a busy day that day. And then Sir Bob Harvey. We intentionally wanted members of the community to open our buildings. We wanted it to signal this is not just a church building, this is a community building. So Bob was very gracious, he came and spoke to that. And there's your very own Glenn Teal, looking very dapper. Why aren't you wearing that today, Glenn? He is just an awesome ambassador, isn't he, for the TAB Trust and for Christian Savings. It was just a fabulous day. So the big question, I think, if I was you, what's the return on our investment? And the return on the investment has to be kingdom return, doesn't it? So on Thursday night, we just concluded our first Alpha course in the new building, and we've had 3 people come to faith, and one guy said, I want to get baptised. So at the end of the day, the kingdom of God grows one life at a time, and your investment into that changes lives. So we just want to say again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon. Doing a great job out there at Langholm. Now, just in concluding, I better put the slide on. The TAB Trust runs by contributions from a lot of people who have heard God's call and are using their spiritual giftings, their secular skills and abilities, and their time to put into the work of the TAB Trust. And you've got the board members there on the left of the screen. You've seen most of them here this morning taking various parts in the service. You've also hopefully realised that many of their partners have also been either in music or participating in the service today. We've got our staff team members there, and you'll recognise Marcus and Karina on piano. So, you know, it's a team effort. So for such a time as this, these people are putting their time and their skills into the TAB Trust as a missional activity for God's work here in New Zealand. Now, not all of us need to think about mission and our mission month as going off to far off lands to do amazing things. And I'm sure we're going to hear about people that are doing that over the next 4 weeks, Ken, yeah? But I want to finish by saying we're all here in New Zealand right now. We're all here in Auckland, and more specifically, we're all right here in the Baptist TAB, in this congregation. God's given every one of us some spiritual gifts. He's given every one of us skills, abilities, personality. I want to encourage you that if you haven't yet heard a calling from God or figured out what you're going to do, I just hope that today's not just a showcase of some missional activity for the TAB Trust, but that you might go away and reflect and say, Lord, what is it that you'd call me to do? Do you really want me to go to a far-flung land? If he does, that's fantastic. If he says, I've got plenty of things here in Auckland, I've got plenty of things here in the Tabernacle Church, I've got things here in All Nations congregation that I could be doing, that I could be giving my skills, my personality, my spiritual gifts to do. These folks here are no different from anyone else in the congregation, other than they've heard God's call and chosen to be involved in this particular thing called the TAB Trust. And I'm grateful for them, by the way. Thank you, team. It's a fantastic team of people, and I really love working with this team. I just want to say that publicly. But, you know, for such a time as this, God has got you in this church. He's got you in Auckland. He's got you in New Zealand. Please, if you go home and you're feeling that you haven't got a calling in your life, think about what God might call you to do here in the church. Who's on next? Ian.
Thank you, Glenn, and I want to pay a special thank you to Dan and Simon for making the trek in to share with us and to all those ministries who put together those videos. So charity begins at home, but it doesn't end there. Mission begins at home, but it doesn't end there, and you'll hear in the weeks ahead all that God is doing abroad as well. So we're going to have the offering come forward, and I'm going to pray for that as Judith and the music team make their way up for the closing songs. Bow your heads, please. Father God, we just thank you for your provision in our lives, for all that you have given us and richly blessed us with. And we bring this offering and these tithes here today, and we ask that you would take them and use them as you see fit, that this is your ministry and your mission in the world.